Good morning to you guys. I'm so excited to be wrapping up this series called I Didn't Ask for This, how to get through what you're going through. And this series, I planned it out as a 3-week-long series, and I had 3 distinct messages that were going to build on each other that I wanted to give to you. And my wife very inconsiderately and inconveniently had a baby. And that kind of just ruined everything. It's like, oh, come on, honey, are you serious right now? No, I'm grateful for my wife. And what made me totally not care about that was the fact that Zachary did such an amazing job last week. Can we give it up for Zachary, our youth director? It was just awesome, and I feel like, man, I actually asked him to share that story when I knew I wasn't going to be able to preach. I said, hey, you're going to have to share this story about your life. I want you to do that. And the thing about Zachary is he does not bandy about his life story as like his calling card. And I think that the millennial generation is so quick to embrace a victim mentality. I love that Zachary is a guy who has been dealt a bad hand but is winning with it. And he's just such an encouragement to me to walk into victory no matter what situation that I'm in life. And he's such an encouragement, I think, to our whole church. Our youth ministry, by the way, is just on fire. It is bigger, but it's also, I just think, more deep and more rich than it's ever been. So if you have students 6th through 12th grade, you're definitely going to want to have them be a part of that. And if they're missing it, man, they're missing out. I just want you to know it is amazing, and I wish that I had a youth ministry like that when I was in school. Now, in week 1 of this series, if you remember, and if it does feel like you're coming in on the third part of a movie, it's because you're coming in on the third part of a movie. You see, we do our sermons in series. We look at an idea, topic, or passage of Scripture for a series of weeks. Next week, we're kicking off a brand new series that's going to be 2 weeks long on thankfulness. You should come and check that out next week. I want you to be a part of that. If you're new with us, try out our church for a period of time. I always say if you work out one time, you're not going to get huge. If you try church once, it's not like, ooh, going to be amazing. But man, I think that if you apply this to your life for a number of weeks, you might see the change. So just a plug for that. Now, in week 1 of this series, we talked about Taylor Swift and Kanye West. If you recall, we just had a conversation about their life, and we talked about looking at Taylor thinking, oh, I'd love to have what she has, you know, $280 million. Wouldn't that be nice? And then if you recall, I showed you this chart right here. And this chart shows the poorest people on earth and then us. And here in Wheatfield, Indiana, we make about $51,000 a year per household, okay? Some of you might make more, some might make less, but the average household, not just individual, but household income is about $51,000. And that makes us about 1,000 to 10,000 times richer than the poorest people of the earth, right? We have about 1,000 to 10,000 times more income per year than they have, that's a lot, right? And then we have Taylor Swift. Now, she makes quite a bit more than us. She actually has the same distance of separation. She makes about 1,000 to 10,000 times more than we do. And what's funny to me is we look at Taylor and we say, man, if I just had what she had, I'd be satisfied. And the poorest people look at us and they say, man, if I just had what they had, I'd feel fine, right? And we talked about this thing called idolatry. And we said, man, yearning for all this stuff at the end of the day, it just doesn't offer life, right? That's what idol stands for, something that we look for life in that doesn't really bring it to us. And there's a whole other side to that chart that I wanted to bring to you. We're going to talk about in week 2, but I didn't get to do that. So we're just going to have a high-speed, low-drag conversation this week. And I can guarantee you I'm going to go long. But that's great. No, just kidding. I won't. I'll end on time. I always do. But I want to ask the question to you this morning. What do you do when you've done everything right, but stuff keeps going wrong? I want to cap this series off with that conversation. I think it's a legitimate discussion because there's probably some of you here today, you'd say, man, I'm doing everything right, but stuff just keeps going wrong in my life. I mean, what do you do when you're in high school and you're trying to honor Jesus, but your friends mock you because you refuse to disrespect and abuse women the way that our society says is okay? What do you do? I've had reports from a lot of students in our public school system in high school who say, man, they have teachers who mock them and call them bigoted and backward for believing in Jesus, right? What do you do when you're trying to do everything right, but stuff keeps going wrong? What do you do when you're trying to find a godly mate and you're getting older, you know, you're like 23 now and you're still single? What do you do when you have standards and everybody else is compromising those standards and it seems like they have intimacy, right? And you don't have anybody who's even close. Everybody in your life's a total zero, right? What are you going to do when you're trying to do everything right, but stuff keeps going wrong? What do you do when you stand up for integrity at work? And you get ostracized, you get yelled at, you get demoted, or even fired? What do you do? We've done everything right, but stuff keeps going wrong. You didn't ask for this. You're trying to honor God, but it seems like at worst he might even be angry at you. It's like, God, why is this happening? I want to answer that question today. We're going to be looking at Acts chapter 27 and a little bit of 28, a little bonus there in 28. You can turn in your YouVersion Bible apps to that. I love seeing the YouVersion Bible get lit up every single morning with hundreds of people from our church who are a part of it. There's this kid, he just gave his life to Christ earlier this year. He's 16 years old. His name's Trevor Williams. And he every morning, I'm like, man, that guy reads more Bible than Jesus did. He's just all over it. It's awesome. And it's encouragement to me to see young people who are setting the example for us, right? So I'd encourage you to follow along. The Bible's in your seats or along in the YouVersion Bible app. We actually have all of our sermon notes available to you in there. And this is one of the most famous passages of Scripture, Acts 27. A lot of people preach on it. This morning's message is going to be called an expository message. That means going verse by verse through it. And that's actually not the way or the example that Jesus sets for it. That's just what a lot of people like because it's easy to do. Jesus always preached topical messages. I try to be like Jesus, but I enjoy expository preaching. So we're going to do that this morning. But I want to give credit to the Bible Knowledge Commentary, to Pastor Chuck Smith and Pastor Stephen Furtick for really informing a lot of this message for me as I was preparing it. And it's one of my favorite passages. It's spoken to me in my life a lot because this passage features a guy named Paul who's in a moment of trouble and transition. See, Paul is the greatest pastor pretty much of all time. If you don't know who Paul is, he's the guy who planted the 7 early churches, pretty much the 7 first churches ever. Paul planted them. He started them. He wrote more books of the Bible than anyone else. And he was called in person by Jesus to become a pastor. That's pretty cool to have a calling, a supernatural calling from Jesus, the Son of God, in person. That's pretty incredible. He's done a lot of great stuff with his life, and he's a definition of a changed life. Paul was very wealthy, influential, and powerful before he became a Christian. And he sold everything. He gave it all away. He went all in with Jesus. And I just have a lot of respect for that, right? He's a definition of a changed life. That's powerful. And he really had this dream of starting a church in Rome. Now, Rome at that time was sort of like a combination of New York and Washington, D.C. It was a really high-key city. It really mattered. It was kind of a big deal. Rome was lit. Everybody wanted to go there. And Paul had yearned to go there for years. He wanted to plant a church there. So he built a career. He built a resume to do it. He fundraised a bunch of money. He got together a plant team, and they were all about to go to Rome to start a church. But right before he leaves, he gets wrongfully and innocently arrested, okay? Now he has to go to Rome, not as a pastor, but as a prisoner. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you say, God, I want to do something great for you with my life. And then all of a sudden you're like, God, I wanted to care for the poor, not be poor, right? I didn't ask for this. God, I wanted to bring healing to the hurting, not be hurting myself. I didn't ask for this. Paul says, God, I wanted to go to Rome to proclaim freedom to the captives, not be captive. I didn't ask for this. Paul is in trouble and transition. And if you're like me, I think a lot of times trouble and transition can produce good work. Are you better under pressure? I work better under pressure. A lot of times for me, if I have a deadline, I work better that way. I make a false deadline every single week. I need to have my sermon done by Wednesday. Right? It doesn't need to be done by Wednesday, but I need that deadline because it just gets me motivated, right? Sometimes I love our new building. I think it's the most beautiful building around. I love it. I enjoy it. But I remember when we were in a building that was held together by, straw and brick and mildew and mold and stuff. And Grant and I, we just had to do what we could do in that building, right? I remember sitting with him. There was something about the pressure of that building that produced a lot of creativity. There's an excellence that urgency and necessity produce. And Paul is in a place of urgency from dread and trouble. He's going where he always wanted to go, but not the way that he wanted to get there. Now, he's imprisoned on a ship. And I want to talk for a minute about what prison was like, okay? There's a scene from The Office where the boss, Michael Scott, pretends to be hard prison Mike or whatever. I'm not going to do that. But for the 3 people who know that reference, they're like, that's funny. Everyone else is like, please move on. Okay, I will. It's not like prison was today. I mean, today you get 3 hots and a cot, and I'm not saying that prison is great today, but there are programs designed for rehabilitation and re-education of prisoners. It's good. There's a part of it that's designed to benefit you. Roman prison, you were sent there to die, okay? Roman prison wasn't nice, and Paul's in prison on a Roman ship, which is a primitive ship. He's chained to the deck with hundreds of other prisoners. He doesn't get to walk around. He only gets to see daylight once every few days, very rarely. It's not a good experience for him, right? It's a bad experience for him in prison. He's lying in his own waste. It's bad. And that's Paul's situation this morning. He wanted to go to Rome to plant a church, but instead, he's a prisoner. And I want to share with you 3 questions that Paul asks that kind of help him get through what he's going through. And I don't know what you're going through today. You might not be imprisoned on a Roman galleon. I doubt that any of us are. Well, I know that we're not. But I believe the questions that Paul applies to his life are very helpful. And I just want you to be able to learn about them because I think they might help you get through what you're going through today. So let's start in Acts chapter 27, starting at verse 10. Paul says, "Men, I believe there's trouble ahead if we go on. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well. But the officer in charge of the prisoners listened more to the ship's captain and the owner than to Paul." And this morning I want to start off with a simple question. Whose voice are you listening to? The voice of God or the voice of people in your life? I think that's a legitimate question, right? The officer in charge chooses to listen to the ship's captain and the owner instead of Paul. And of course he did, right? That makes sense. But I want to ask you this morning, what voice is guiding you when you make a major decision in your life? I feel like often I'm tempted to listen to people and to listen to my own logic instead of the voice of God in my life. I mean, that's a big temptation. It's easy to listen to the Spirit of God when you're young, when you're like 15 years old. I remember when I gave my life to Christ, I was 15, and I was like, "God, I'll go wherever you want me to go. I'm going to save myself till I'm married. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'll do whatever you want, God. Your way is my way. I'm doing this." But now that I'm older, it's like, man, a little harder to choose the things of God in my life, to listen to the voice of God. In 2014, when our church was dying, man, we were seeking God's voice every day. We were seeking God's truth in His Word. I mean, God will do anything you want us to do, right? But now that there's a little bit more success, the downside of success is it's harder to take risks. You stop listening to the Spirit of God, and sometimes my first reflex, if I'm just being honest, is no longer prayer and seeking God and His Word. So often now, instead, I start asking my senses, right? Like, what does standard operating procedure say? What do the consultants tell us to do in this moment? I just think that for so many of us, most people have some sort of experience as a young person. I went to vacation Bible school and I became a Christian. I said, I'm going to follow Jesus in youth group. I'm going to be a Christian forever. I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to do everything that He says, and I'm going to go to church and whatever. It's going to be amazing, and I love God so much. That's so many people's story. And then what happens? Just over the course of time, you stop listening to the Spirit of God and you just start listening to your senses, don't you? You just start listening to the voice of people around you, and you no longer are seeking God in your life. It's just the way it is. I'm not saying that we should ignore common sense, but question, why do we say that we believe in a supernatural God, but live like that supernatural God doesn't exist and isn't available to us? And I know so many people, do you believe in God? Oh yeah, absolutely. Why do you live like He doesn't exist then? Why do you never seek His will and His ways in your life? Why do you never ask Him? You see, there's a lot about God's plan for our life that senses wouldn't lead us to, our personal senses wouldn't lead us to, right? I mean, it didn't make sense for Noah to build an ark on dry land, did it? It didn't make sense for David to fight Goliath in representative conflict. It didn't make sense for Joshua to march around Jericho 7 times with a marching band, right? I mean, that was ridiculous. And it didn't make sense for 23 Dutch immigrants to start a church in the middle of nowhere 125 years ago. It didn't make sense for a dying church with barely 200 in worship to make plans for a regional worship center that could seat 700 and would transform Northwest Indiana. It didn't make sense when that happened, but I'm glad we did. I'm glad we saw God's Spirit in that moment. Sometimes listening to human sense will get you into trouble, won't it? I mean, it made sense for 10 spies to look at the promised land and say, oh, we could never take it, right? That made sense. That was a sensible thing. They were just speaking with sense. It made sense for, Abraham to look at Hagar and say, well, honey, I mean, I got to sleep with her. We got to see God's plan fulfilled. I mean, if you say so, I'll do it. Okay, baby? Baby, please. I mean, look, this is God's will, right? Made sense. Made sense for Saul to offer a sacrifice when Samuel was running late. I just think some of the most pivotal moments of our lives, they don't really make sense, and yet it's the call of God. It didn't make sense for Kristen and I to move here. It didn't. But I'm so glad that we did. I'm so glad that we sought God's Spirit and God's voice in our life. I'll be honest, it didn't make sense for my wife to marry me, right? I mean, she was the prettiest, most popular, most pursued girl in her whole school. Everybody wanted to marry Kristen. Sometimes I just wonder why she picked a penniless youth pastor. She could have married one of the Morrell boys, and their parents owned Morrell Trucking. They were loaded, right? Why didn't she do that? I mean, she could be at Lannis in sandals for spring break, right? Driving a Lexus around town. I mean, that would be great. That would have been her life, right? It didn't make sense for her to choose me, but she sought the voice of God in her life, and I thank God. I benefited. Now, verse 12 is kind of interesting. It says, and since Fair Havens was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix, further up the coast of Crete. What I love about the Bible is it doesn't take place in the North Pole. It's not some like fake, fictitious area. Like you can visit Fair Havens in Phoenix in the island of Crete. You know exactly what they're talking about. It says most of the crew wanted to go on and spend the winter there. But Phoenix was a good harbor with only a southwest and northwest exposure. The point in this passage I want to draw you to is most of the crew, where it says most of the crew. You see, I think the statement most of, the majority of Americans, everybody else is doing it, Lots of people are doing this. This is how everybody feels. Most people feel this way. That's a pretty persuasive statement, isn't it? I mean, we hear that, we see that, and it's like, ooh, you know, there's something magnetic about it. But I want you to hear this. Just because most of Americans now feel some way doesn't mean that it's true. That's not the arbiter of truth. Most of Americans now feel one way about human sexuality, but that's psychologically and sociologically destructive. It leads to unhappiness and lower levels of satisfaction with our sex life. We know this. This is true. And yet, most of Americans is just hurting in a direction that doesn't lead to satisfaction. It leads to personal hurt. I heard John Oliver on Last Week Tonight, who was a great comedian, but really not one of my favorite people, sitting there mocking Christians for the idea of chastity until marriage. And I'm like, man, do you understand that there's an overwhelming amount of truth, evidence, and statistics that points to the way of Jesus is truth? Like, why would you lead people to a life of misery? Why would you mock what brings joy? Why are you mocking joy and leading people to misery? God's promises, and I want you to hear this, always, always, always trump human circumstances. To the high school student who's being mocked in class, God's promise still stands. You get the laugh on that one. And even though most people around you might disagree with you, let's never let most of the people in the room trump truth, right? Let's never let the majority of people stop us from stepping into a calling of God in our lives. And let's start seeking the voice of God first. Just got some simple points for you in seeking God's voice. What if you started reading the YouVersion Bible app every morning, seeking God's plan from His Word? What if you started seeking God in prayer before you had to make big decisions? What if you started listening to the voice of God in your life? What if you just started seeking that instead of listening to the crowd first? After all, we say we believe in a supernatural God that we have a personal relationship with. Why don't we start having a personal relationship with that God? Whose voice are you listening to? Second question, what is driving you? Your dreams or your dread? In verse 13, it says, when a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought they could make it. You ever think you could make it? Oh, I can make it. We can do this. So they pulled up anchor and they sailed close to the shore of Crete. But the weather changed abruptly and a wind of typhoon strength called a northeaster burst across the island and blew them out to sea. So they're sailing along the lee shore of Crete. The wind comes and it blows them out into the middle of the Mediterranean. They're lost at sea. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind. They were trying to get back. They were trying to get home. They were trying to get to Phoenix. But check this out. They give up on their dreams. They gave up and they let it run before the gale. They're no longer moving because of their dream of getting to Phoenix, a better harbor, right? Now, they're just being driven by their problems, driven by their dread. And I just ask you this morning, what's driving you? Dreams being achieved in your life or dread of failure? When I was a young man, I used to dream dreams. I used to think, oh man, I want to do these great things. I'd wake up in the morning excited about taking one step closer to a dream that I had, right? But the older I get, I'll tell you the truth, the more often I feel like I wake up dreading. I wake up letting people down. I mean, people have expectations of me. I have responsibilities and I dread failure. So I just wake up and it's my dread of failure that drives me a lot of times, right? I want to ask you, how old were you when you gave up on your dreams? How much did they pay you at that first job to give up on your dreams, right? Isn't it funny how in our life, if we're honest with ourselves, it's not our dreams that really drive us. For many of us, it's fear, it's shame, it's control. For others, it's grief, it's conflict, or it's tradition. And this is the problem with dreams versus dread. The dreams are free, but the journey can cost more than we ever imagined. The dream is free though. High schoolers, it's easy to dream. It's easy to say, oh, I'm gonna be a doctor. 85% of freshmen in college say they're gonna be a doctor, but most of them drop out, right? That's a made up statistic, but you know, I mean, it's just, it's easy to dream of raising a great family, isn't it? It's easy to say, I'm gonna build a great ministry for God, or I'm gonna build a great business, or I'm gonna become a great contractor, or I'm gonna become rich. It's easy to dream of all those things. The problem is the journey costs more than we imagine. Today we look at Paul. I'll admit, I look at Paul, I say, man, I wanna be like him. I wanna transform the Mediterranean for the gospel. I wanna transform an entire continent for the message of Jesus. I would like to do what Paul did. We look at successful role models, we say, I wanna be like them. But nobody knows what it actually took. Nobody knows how hard they work except they do. And I'll tell you what, from the outside, we almost always underestimate how hard, how expensive, and how high the cost was for that journey. We do this with mothers. I remember before I had kids, I looked at young parents, I said, I will never put my kid on a leash. Then I had Hermione. I was like, okay, I get leashes, that makes sense. I don't want her to die, right? I underestimated. We do this with politicians. Oh, that politician's ridiculous. How could they do that? They're crazy, politics. And look, the political environment that we're in is crazy. It is. We look at politicians, we have no idea the cost. We have no idea the blood, sweat, and tears that go into the decisions that they're making in that moment, right? We just say, oh, how could they? You know, if I were there, you don't know. We do this with presidents. I'm not saying endorsing or whatever, but oh, this president is the Antichrist, this president's the worst, this president's unstable. It's like, guys, you don't know because you haven't been there. If you want to do it, then do it. We underestimate the cost. We do this with pastors. People come to me all the time. Hey, you should do this. You should start that. You should do all these things. And it's like, man, you have no idea. You have no idea what goes into it until you're on that journey. Nobody knows what it takes until you're actually the one doing it. And here's the problem, is I think that so many of us, we left the harbor with a dream in mind. But then a northeaster came and it blew us out to sea. And I think for some of us, we've even forgotten what the dream was. We don't even remember what we left harbor for. We don't even remember the dream. We're just out there in the middle of the ocean, and we're no longer dreaming. We're just dreading. We're just dreading. I can't die. I don't want to die, okay? We started off running after the dream, but we end up in dread, and it's easy to think, I never asked for this. I never knew it would hurt like this. I never asked for this much work. I never thought it would be so stressful. I didn't ask for this. And the truth is, for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, you did ask for it. You asked for this. This was a dream that you had. You just forgot about the dream. Sometimes all we need to remember is a dream in the middle of the storm. Sometimes I relate to the boat more than I relate to Paul, just trying to hold it together. It says in verse 18, the next day, as gale force winds continued to batter the ship, the crew began throwing the cargo overboard. They're no longer trying to make money. They're no longer trying to fulfill a dream. They're just throwing it overboard. They're like, man, we just don't want to die. That's our goal. Our goal is not death, right? The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and they threw it overboard. I want to talk for a moment about dread versus despair. Dread versus despair. They're in this moment of dread and desperation, right? And then there's a line that they're about to cross. We'll see it in a minute. And that line is into despair and depression, right? Now, dread and desperation will drive you to places you never thought you'd go. You start throwing your dreams overboard, right? You're just like, I don't want to die. I'm throwing my dreams. You're quitting committees. You're cutting off relationships. You're looking at your kids. I used to have dreams for my kids. Oh, I'm going to feed my kids healthy food. I'll never feed them any of that hydrogenated corn syrup and, high fructose. Now I'm like, hey, are you eating goldfish? Good. Just eat more of it. My goal now is that you not die. That's all I want, okay? Just don't die. Just eat it. Eat it. Great. Is that juice? Fine. Good. I love it. Just let it soak on those teeth. That's fine. All I want is for you to not die and for me not to lose my mind. That's it. It's dread. It's dread. It's not dreams. I used to dream of a great family, right? I used to dream of all these things. I'm living in my dream. And that's what I say when people ask me all the time, hey, how you doing today? I'll say, good, I'm living the dream. You know why I say that? I don't say that because I'm positive. I say that because I struggle with negativity and I need to remind myself that I asked for this. That my family is a dream that I had. I wanted these kids and I'm happy about it. Because I think sometimes it's easy to live in that place where it's like, oh, I hate this. I just want to not die. But dread doesn't drive us. Let's be guided by our dreams. Now check out this moment here where they cross from dread into despair. It says in verse 20, the terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars until at last all hope was gone. You can underline that in your Bibles. At last, all hope was gone. See, this is the moment that despair comes. They lost all hope of being saved. They're in the pit of deep loss, and the dream is truly dead. I just wonder if there's somebody here today who's in that place, who's crossing over that line. You used to have a dream, but now you're just kind of going into despair. One counselor says depression is the loss of hope that it could ever be different or that you could ever feel different than it is right now. You're in that place where you're no longer like, oh, I hope I get out of this. You're like, this is the way it's always going to be. I'll never be able to go on. I'll never be able to forgive. I'll never be able to move forward. This is going to be the rest of my life. This is just the way it's going to be, right? That's despair. That's depression. I've been there. That's a bad place. And that's where the crew of the boat is right now. They're in this place where they have lost sight of the dream. Before I move on, I just want to ask the church, have you ever been in that place? Paul's a little weird, by the way. I haven't mentioned that. And Paul reminds me a lot that God can use weird people to do great things. Look at the person next to you and say, I think God could use you. Just kidding, don't do that. That's an insult, right? See the joke I made there? I made it. It's funny to me. God can use weird people too. Sometimes I'm not even sure if I'd be friends with Paul. Check this out in verse 21. It says, no one had eaten for a long time. This is where Paul comes in the pit of despair. Finally, Paul called the crew together. Says like the best thing ever. He says, men, you should have listened to me in the first place. And at this point, I'm like, I didn't know Paul was a woman, right? I'm just kidding. Look, here's the truth, men. The reason why we can't ever told you so to the women around us because we're never right. That's the problem. We could told you so once in a while. The problem is in my marriage, I'm actually genuinely wrong all the time. I would told you so my wife as much as I could, but I don't know because I haven't been right in 8 years of marriage. That's like not a lie. She's just brilliant and wonderful and godly. But I did think maybe Christian could preach a Mother's Day sermon titled Acts 27:21. Men, you should have listened to us in the first place. We could even get coffee mugs for it. Women, or Elise, do you think we could do that? Just get that in the shop. Men, you should have listened to us in the first place. That'd be great. Key verse. We'll put it up on the wall. One of their church's core values. No, just kidding. Seriously now. God did not call us to a life of fear and dread. He called us to power, love, and a sound mind. He calls us to live the dream and seek his best for our lives. What if you spent some time this morning remembering and writing out God's dream for your life? What if you spent some time remembering, this is the dream that I used to have? What if you spent some time seeking God's voice, saying, God, what is the dream you have for my life? Because I think for so many of us, we're just in this place where we've been being driven by our dread for so many years, we don't even remember the dream. What if you had the courage and the audacity to seek that dream out, to write it out, and maybe share it with somebody? Share it with somebody you trust. Share it with somebody who's godly. Say, hey, here's a dream that I have, right? What if you started waking up and saying, you know what? I'm living for this dream. I'm living for the dream. I'm living for God's plan in my life. And then what if you started asking God for it every day? Right? How would that transform the everyday mundane of your life? As I change my daughter's diaper, I'm living the dream right now, right? What's driving you? Dreams versus dread. The third question is, what is your courage tied to? Is it tied to conditions or is it tied to God's sovereignty? Paul says, men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not left Crete. You would have avoided all this damage and loss. Thanks, Paul. But take courage. This is where Paul really gets weird. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. And I'm like, is that good news or is that bad news? Because I just heard you say the ship is going to go down. And I'm pretty sure that means we're all going to die. I know you said we're not, but look, we're in the middle of the ocean. So the ship's going down. Like, that's like our lifeline, right? If the ship goes down, we're going to die. Doesn't make sense. And here's the problem, is our hope is in the boat. Our courage is tied to the boat. So we think that if the ship sinks, that means we're going to die. Paul has the courage to look at the men and say, take courage. What if the boat sinks? You're not going to die. This is not the end of your story. I want to ask you this morning, what is your courage tied to this morning? What circumstance in your life is your courage tied to? A relationship, a job, an income, your health? Millennials, we're just the quickest to tie our courage to the boat of our circumstances. We do this all the time. It's the best day of my life. My boo changed her Instagram pic to include me. This is amazing. This is the worst day of my life. She took it down and I didn't get any likes on any of my posts today, right? Because your hope is in the boat. That's the way it goes. We put our hope in the boat. It's easy. It's easy to lose hope and lose courage. But Paul has the insight and the courage to look at these men in the midst of tragedy and say, what if? What if the boat sinks? What if the boat sinks? I think that's a question that we need to start asking ourselves. Hey, what if she does leave you? What if he does die? And what if you lose it all? What happens after that? What does the world look like in light of God's promises after that moment? You see, this passage rescued me in a moment of despair in my life. On August 8th, 2013, I had a really bad experience, okay? I know the date because it was the day before Hermione was due to be born, or the day that she was due to be born. It was the day before she was actually born. And I had these terrible headaches, so I went to the doctor, and the doctor said we need to do a CAT scan, so I went in to get a CAT scan, right? And before I get the CAT scan, I tell the guy, hey, my wife was like having contractions this morning. She gives birth in a hurry. Here's my phone. If you see like an urgent text message in all caps, it's kind of a high-key thing for me, can you please tell me so that I can go and be there for, the birth of my daughter? Because you can't bring the phone with you when you're getting a CAT scan, in case you didn't know. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll take it. And then I said, hey, dude, you gonna let me see my brain? He's like, absolutely, knuckles, right? So he goes in there, and he's standing behind like the cry room window there, this glass, and he's doing, scanning my brain or whatever. I don't know what's happening. I'm sitting in this tubey thing. And I see him, can kind of see him through the glass, and I see him like getting, how Dutchmen get like blotchy when they're really upset? Do you have anybody who's like a walking mood ring around you and they get the blotches and you're like, batten down the hatches. It's bad news. Get blotchy, right? I see him get blotchy, and I'm like, oh, this is bad news, right? And he comes out, he says, where did you say your headaches were? I said, right here. He goes, how many kids did you say you have? I said, I got one and one on the way. And he goes back behind the door, and then he comes out again. He says, I say, hey man, you gonna let me see my brain? He goes, nah. What? Why? He goes, well, in case you had any questions, I didn't want to. What do you mean if I have any questions? It looks like a brain, right? It looks like a brain should look, I'll let the oncologist answer that. Oncologist? What are you talking about, right? So on the way home, I get an urgent call saying, hey, we found a mass in your brain. It's 10 centimeters by 13 centimeters by 14 centimeters, which is a little bigger than a big orange, small grapefruit, kind of softball right up here. It was scary. All of a sudden, my world was a little bit shaken, right? I mean, that was a tough night. I remember going home and holding my wife, great with child. She was in labor. She was going to deliver this baby, and I'm telling her, hey, by the way, I might die. Got a thing, going on up here. I remember holding her. She was crying, not from the pain of labor, maybe from the pain of labor, but also from the sadness of thinking about my life ending. I was 27 years old. There was fear. There was anxiety. There was depression. I was worrying about this right here. What's going to happen to my family? Really, they'll be fine. My wife can bring a date to our funeral. She's beautiful and wonderful and whatever. But what's going to happen? What's going to happen to me? No, I'm just kidding. Is that too much? That's too much. That was like one of those jokes where it's like funny to me, but for you guys, you're all like taking this right now thinking, okay? So anyway, I was like, what's going to happen? What if my family goes this way? What if they go this way on the chart, right? We live in America. I mean, we have a great social welfare program. It's not going to be the end of the world for them. And I was worried, what if I lose the opportunity to achieve my dreams? I mean, I'm 27, and I thought maybe, I couldn't be Taylor, but maybe I could move us along this way on the chart a little bit. I'm losing that opportunity, right? The problem is my hope was in the boat. Whenever we put our hope in the boat of our lives, what we do is we truncate this chart down to this right here, and this is what we see, and all we can worry about is, what if this happens? What if I don't get an iPhone 10? What if this happens? This is going to be the worst day of my life. This is the worst day. This is the worst experience. Right? That's the way we live. But when we lift our eyes to the promises of God, suddenly we can start asking questions of, what if I die? What if my kids and wife enter poverty? What if my line ends? Are God's promises real? Is heaven still real? I didn't ask for this trial, but I did ask for and receive the grace of Jesus in my life. And suddenly my life is no longer framed by these circumstances, right? It's framed by the grace of God. It's framed by the glory of God. It's framed by the presence of God in my life for all eternity in heaven. And that's a big and different place, despite my circumstances. His promise still stands. Despite my circumstances, great is His faithfulness. In light of my circumstances, I'm choosing joy, I'm choosing faith, and I'm believing that through Jesus, He can make a way where there is no way and where I see no hope, right? That's the promise of God in my life, and that's what happens. Paul says, take courage. And what he's saying is untie your hope from this right here. This is petty. This is small, and anchor it to Jesus and His sovereign and complete grace. Take courage. I wonder if there's someone here today whose courage is tied to a sinking circumstance. What is your courage tied to? Your job, your marriage, your health, your children. Oh, if this happens, it's the end of your story. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's not the reality that we live in, right? In Christ, no matter the circumstances, for rich or for poor, in sickness and health, His promise still stands. He is always faithful. God will not fail you, so take courage. So take courage. I know that some of you, though, are actually asking, how do I actually get that courage? We set our hope in Him, right? We anchor our hope in the work of Jesus. Now, here's the thing. Because my wife, as I mentioned, inconveniently had a baby, week 2 of the series, I didn't get to preach the part that I wanted to share with you, so this is where I just have to insert it in here really quickly. See, there's another part of this chart that's talked about 5 times more than heaven in the Bible. We don't talk about it that much, and we should talk about it. And that's this place called hell, okay? And this is a reality, right? And hell is not defined first and foremost by fire and brimstone. Hell is defined as complete separation from God. Hell is the only place beyond the universe where God isn't. You know what blows my mind is the joy of Jesus in our lives isn't just that He saves us from this life. He saves us from this life. And He moves us from an eternal destiny here to an eternal paradise here. I mean, that's amazing. And what blows my mind is I think sometimes our vision is so small that we worry about moving from like here to here. We spend most of our life like, oh, what if this happens? What if this happens? And this is why Paul is so calm in the middle of the storm. He's like, you guys, you understand this isn't like this. It seems like a big deal to you right now, but this isn't a big deal. The reality of our faith, the reality of our existence is that there's more. I know some of you here today, you'd say, well, I doubt that there is that existence. Think about it, you guys. The universe didn't happen by accident. Something doesn't come from nothing. Our DNA, double helix DNA, didn't happen by happenstance. We believe there's a supernatural God beyond this. Logic would point us in that direction, right? We see this. This is real. And when we look at our tiny, itty-bitty, minuscule circumstance, oh, what if I make $10,000 less a year? Right? This is not the end of our story. We're worried about moving in this tiny little area. Paul says, take courage because Jesus transforms us. He gives us hope and He lifts us out of our circumstances. Death is not to be feared. I want you to know being a Christian is not about being a good person. Okay? Being a Christian is not about doing good things, and it's not about believing in God. Believing in Jesus, that doesn't make you a Christian. Remember, Satan believes in Jesus, right? Is Satan a Christian? No. What makes you a Christian? Being a follower of Jesus. The Bible calls it discipleship. It's going all in with Jesus and making Him your leader and forgiver. I think so often we bandy this term about, oh, he's a Christian, he's a Christian, he's a Christian. Everybody's a Christian, right? No, that's not true. That's not true. A Christian is somebody who follows Christ, who has made Jesus their leader and forgiver, who asked Jesus to forgive their sins and lead their life. And you know when somebody's actually a follower of Christ versus somebody who's a cultural Christian. You see the difference. You see it. You see it in their life. You're like, oh yeah, I see that. I see that. Doesn't mean that we're perfect, right? But it does mean we're earnestly trying to follow Jesus as our leader and forgiver. Have you done that? When did that happen for you? I think that's a legitimate question. Paul just reminds us that because of the grace of Jesus, Jesus made a way where there was no way, because of his work on the cross. And when we ask Jesus to forgive our sins and lead our life, he makes a bridge between life and the life that is to come. Paul goes on in verse 39, it says, when morning dawned, they didn't recognize a coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get the boat ashore by running the ship aground. You realize they've been at the ocean for many days. They haven't seen the sun, the moon, or stars, and all of a sudden they see land. It's like, ah! So they cut off the anchors, and they left for the sea. They lowered the rudders and raised the foresail, and they headed towards the shore. But they hit a shoal, and they ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship struck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves, and it began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul. Check this out. It says, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. I think a lot of times we resent God for not letting us do something. I think there's a lot of teenagers in the room who are like, I wish I could have gone to that party. You don't know about the texting driver that God saved you from by not letting you do that. You don't know about that evil man that you would have met and fallen for that God protected you from by not letting you go. You don't know about the cancerous cell that he didn't let multiply in your life. The older I get, morning by morning, the more mercies I see. It says, then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first, make for land. The others held on to their planks and the debris from the broken ship, and everyone escaped safely. I think so often we put our hope in the boat. These prisoners, they put their hope in the boat only to realize that God gave you a plank to float on. And it might not be comfortable. It might not be the Caribbean cruise that you were hoping for, but man, God made a way where there was no way. And no matter what, I just want to remind you that this experience is not the end of your story. This is not the end of your story. God's promises are real. They still stand. In the best of times and in the worst of times, his love holds fast. And through Jesus, he makes a way where there is no way. And I believe he'll do it again in this moment. Now, normally I'd end the series right here and say, they made it to shore, it's good, it's whatever. But then I read chapter 28, and I was like, it's such a good chapter. There's a really good point in it, and I just want to make it. I'm over time. And I almost cut it out of first service because I had you guys coming in. I gave it to them anyway, so I'm going to give it to you guys because it's good. It's a good point. You guys want this point? Yeah, I'd like that point. That's good. That's really motivating for me. I love that. That's good. Well, in 28 verse 1, it says, once we were on shore, we learned that we were on the island of Malta. And I love that you can visit the island of Malta. It's tiny. It's a tiny island. But anyway, the people of the island were very kind to us. It was cold and rainy, so they built a fire on shore to welcome us. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, a poisonous snake was driven out by the heat and bit him on the hand. And at this point, I'm like, are you serious right now, God? Come on. A snake? I mean, he just got shipwrecked and he just got wrongfully imprisoned. This is where I'd enter despair. I'd be like, well, this is the way it's always going to be, I guess. You know, I mean, I guess it's come on, a snake? Really? After the shipwreck, after the floggings, after the imprisonment? This is ridiculous. Want a refund. The people of the island saw it hanging from his hand, and they said to each other, a murderer, no doubt. Though he escaped the sea, justice will not permit him to leave. I just relate to Paul in that moment, and I don't know if your life has been like mine, but I've had a lot of people say mean things to me in my life. Just been a part of my existence, especially a part of my childhood. Paul is standing there. He's dying, right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, he has a snake in his hand, right? First off, for me, if there was a snake in my hand, I'd be like, it's a snake, right? Secondly, the venom, right? But first the snake, though, right? But Paul's there with a snake in his hand, and people are mocking him. I don't know if you've ever had somebody mock you in your life. I don't know if you've ever had somebody say harsh things about you in your life. It's hard. It's hard to push through that, isn't it? But Paul doesn't let it affect him. Because his courage was set on this, right? He's like, man, this circumstance, the snake isn't going to end me. The shipwreck didn't end me. And even if it does, I have the promise of God in my life. He doesn't even listen to the noise of his detractors. Look at what it says in verse 5. It says, but Paul shook the snake into the fire and was unharmed. He didn't even listen. He just shook that snake. I want to ask the room to stand as we get ready to close. I just want you to stand up. This has been a great series, but I think this is maybe the most powerful point to me in the whole series. I want you to get this. This snake on his hand, I think the devil put it there in order to kill Paul. But Paul shakes that snake into the very fire that was warming him. So instead of killing him, what that does is that snake brings life to him. It fuels the fire that's bringing him warmth. His faith is so great, he just looks at what the devil intended for evil and he believes God's gonna use it for good. And he shakes that snake. I just think there might be someone here today who needed to hear that. Maybe you just need to shake that snake and say, God, I trust you. I'm gonna shake that snake back into the fire. I'm gonna send it back where it came from. Do me a favor, you keep that, because I don't need it. This isn't a part of God's plan in my life. I'm gonna shake that snake. I'm here to tell you that God has bigger plans for you. I don't know what you're going through at this point, and I can't tell you that the bad thing won't happen, but what I can tell you is that God can redeem it, and this is not the end of your story. I can tell you that God is not finished with you yet, and His promise still stands. Great is His faithfulness. So shake that snake. I believe that the same God who rescued Paul from prison, who rescued Paul from the shipwreck, would do it again with the snake. So Paul just said, I'll shake it off into the fire. I'm done. I'm not worried about it. And look, you might have lost a dream that you wanted. You might be dealing with a broken relationship or a terrible bankruptcy, or the loss of a loved one, or a devastating diagnosis. But the same God who raised Jesus from the dead will deliver us from our sin, will redeem us from the snake, will restore us to the presence of God. So shake that snake. Shake that snake, right? This is not the end of our story. I serve the God who moves mountains. I serve the God who laid the foundations of the earth as the angels rejoice. I serve the God who knit us together in our mother's womb and had a plan for our life before we were born. This is not the end of our story. We will get through this. I just want to pray for our church as we close. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your Son who redeemed us from sin and who saved us from the snake named Satan. Today I pray that you would give us the faith to get through what we're going through, that we could set our eyes on your promises and walk into your best for our life. Today as a church, in the name of Jesus, we shake that snake and walk into your best for our life. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.